There's a code of silence that we don't dare speak. There's a wall between us and a river so deep. We keep pretending that there's nothing wrong. There's a code of silence and it can't go on.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 9th of August 2013. For the newcomers, please look into the website cuttingthroughthematrix.com. You find lots and lots of audios for free download where I take you through the system that set itself up over 100 years ago, and with this big plans for future cultural changes to get us into the end product, basically, of a new type of humanity, and we're almost there too. And how it was set up by the biggest bankers or international money lenders of their day back in the city of London, and how they plan to bring on academia on board, which they've done, and scientists and so on. They recruit lots of scientists. They give grant money to science to create new kinds of even humans down the road to serve an elite better, all based on eugenics, of course. But they decided 100 years ago to take over all the resources of the world too, through wars and every other means possible, and even set out people like Cecil Rhodes to go out and start it off and take over diamond and gold mines in Africa. So this organization is a private organization, Royal Institute for International Affairs, and its counterpart, actually it's its cousin, CFR, which is the American branch, and they have branches across the world in all countries now. All the top politicians are a member of this one organization, everywhere across the planet. But we're well on the way into this agenda, of course. They also brought in many of what was called the socialist or communist agenda into this particular plan as well, because they preferred big governments managing an unruly people. And that way too, they can keep everyone under wraps, basically, and under observation. And also, they train the public, even from childbirth, which they're already doing in Scotland, by the way, by putting out government-appointed overseers over every child that's born. So they're well on their way to their whole global agenda and to the new society, a new system, which again is based on austerity, post-consumerism for the public, because all their spending money will go on bare essentials. The things that you really need: energy, food, water, housing, and so on. We're going through it. Everything was planned, as I say, 100 years ago, and the culture was degraded step by step to bring us to this stage as well. It's worked awfully well. And also, remember too, you bring me to you. You can help me take along by buying the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, where I take you through this whole art of conning great multitudes of people from ancient times to the present. Old techniques, of course, although they're much more sophisticated today with instant communication across the planet, the same news getting put out across the planet, because all the newscasters and all the big news employers, magnates you might say, they're part of the same club, this global agenda club. So we'll get the same indoctrination, same nonsense, and most folk believe it, unfortunately. So help yourself. But to buy the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com to see how it's done, you can also, from the US to Canada, remember you can still use personal checks or international postal money orders from the post office, or you can send cash or use PayPal across the world. You got Western Union, MoneyGram, and PayPal. And straight donations are awfully welcome, because we're going through mandatory inflation, which means devaluation of your currencies and less buying power for everything you buy. Everybody's seeing the prices going up and up and up. Planned before the bank crashes, by the way. In fact, the bank crashes in 2008 were essential to kick it all off. Nothing happens on this big scale without years and years of notice of it all happening to the big boys, because they plan it all, including the wars too. And they do go by timetables. They're very stickly about timetables, because they run the world like a big business plan. Awfully important to understand that. And they have the different think tanks working for the big foundations, these private foundations owned by the biggest international corporations and bankers on the planet. And they literally plan the future. So the future doesn't somehow progress and stumble into something down the road. It's planned to go down certain pathways, and we have never faltered from that path whatsoever for 100 years, including the World War I and II. That was all part of it too. Because sovereignty at the end has to be given up completely, and groups of nations are brought together under regions, and you have the European Union, for instance, which was the first part to be amalgamated to all the countries into one superpower, supposedly, as they'll get taxed to death by the super Soviet system called the EU Parliament, which is not democratic at all. America eventually has to go the same way, and you can see it being pushed today with more authoritative types of statements being given out to the general population, which are not democratic at all. There's no input from the general public on where things are going. It's all simply handouts to the newspapers from government departments, and that's how the Soviet Union ran it too, by the way, for those who don't know that. That way, there's no demonstrations in the streets before things are signed and so on, because the public don't hear about it until it's passed. It's so simple a technique. But anyway, I go through the history of all this, techniques that are used, and I go through the effects of the psychologists, behaviorists, and anthropologists even too, because they have every specialist on every ethnic group involved in this to manage us all down the garden path to obedient slaves, basically. And the US, which took over the whole plan from Britain, the torch was handed way back in the days of Kipling to the US to take over as a policeman of the world, which also meant too they'd plunder across the planet and share it with those in London, the city of London, that is, the banking city. And of course, they accumulate debt at the same time, because the public pays for all the wars, and the private corporations are given all the free goodies. That's how it was in Britain too, and that's why they pretty well collapsed as well. And the US is at that stage today. Collapse is simply, it's all patchwork today to stop it all collapsing completely. And I'll be touching on some of this tonight, because the signs are all around us, of course, of basically what happens in third world countries, and how they got into the mess that they're in too, some of them. And the big bankers, of course, are going along with this agenda because they're part of the Royal Institute for International Affairs. In fact, it was that private club that set up the United Nations, the World Bank, the Bank for International Settlements, and the International Monetary Fund, and many other organizations, which you think are all so official, and they're there naturally like gravity or something. No, they were all put there by the private club that were the elite of the day, and still are, by the way, the same elite of the day. So we're not staggering down time, just bumping into things and politicians get up and fix it. Far, far from it. Everything that happens on a large scale was planned well in advance, including the mass unemployment that would be left after all the factories went off to China. And that took years of negotiations through the World Trade Organization, another private organization set up by CFR, Royal Institute for International Affairs, a long time ago. And we had no say in that whatsoever. So they knew the fallout across the Western world, and they basically said, we'll bring in service economies. Service economies they discussed as far back as the 1970s in Britain, because that's what they had planned for that before the US and Canada and elsewhere. Because service economies, you import stuff and simply pass it around from hands to hands to the shopkeeper, and you can only float for a few years using that technique, then you sink. And they used to equate it like a dog falling into a swimming pool. It can keep dog paddling for as long as it can, but once it's tired out, it sinks and it drowns. And that's what the service economy was meant to do eventually. The country that's not manufacturing, doesn't have all the different levels, from raw ore, whatever, up to the finished product. So many different processes and different companies it goes through that spreads the wealth around. If it doesn't have that, believe you me, it's lost a lot of its money and its wealth and its standard of living. And that's what service economies were designed to do. But thanks again to all the top people, all prime ministers and presidents who were elected, and again vetted prior to elections to be eligible for election by these private organizations, CFR and Royal Institute for International Affairs, because they're all members of this club. And they signed everything away a long time ago. And they've not finished yet, by the way. Now hear the music coming in, so I'll be touching on some more of this after these messages. Hi folks, I'm back cutting through the matrix. Now, indoctrination takes many, many forms. It's lifelong, of course. Whether you call it education or indoctrination, it's the same thing. And the state always decides what kind of indoctrination the elite want to put on to the people down below. And so we all get our propaganda, indoctrination, and so on. So well done too, even through school, where they can make you believe in anything by omission when they show you the little videos and so on, and DVDs of particular topics, whether it's wildlife or forests or whatever else. And there's always a woman who speaks over it with music in the background too, that gets very, very ominous at certain times, or else is very happy at certain times. And that's all part of the techniques of brainwashing, by the way. If you want to give an argument about something, there's no music in the background. There's no woman with a low kind of moderated voice that is hypnotic in the way it talks to you. It's all done by design. But anyway, it's lifelong, and we've been all brainwashed to believe that dictators, for instance, and the cruelest men in the world all wear military uniforms. And you can go all the way back, as I say, especially from the Russian Revolution into the days of Stalin. And then you had Nazi Germany. Then, of course, you had, well, even before that, you had the Spanish leaders too, who wore uniforms during the Civil War. Then you had in Franco. And then you had the same thing too, of course, with Castro. And different ones too. So we're so used to seeing that figure, because we live in democracies, right? We're kept being told that we live in democracies and that we have some kind of say in something, which of course we have none at all. But that's the techniques that's still used today. If you live in a democracy, you'll accept all kinds of tyranny because you can't equate evil as being dressed up in a business suit. I've said that so many, many times. Especially when they've got degrees from the top universities as well. I mean, because we get confused with intelligence and good people, and education and good people. We get very confused about that. It's been somehow drummed into us. It's all one and the same, but it's not, of course. And this is a little quote from C.S. Lewis from the Screwtape Letters, and the Screwtape Letters is worth going through, all the little sayings he put in there, because it's about a sort of devil talking to his son, an apprentice, on all of mankind and how it works, etc. But it says here, I live in the managerial age. It's the managerial age. That's what we're in today. A corporate age, in a world of admin, for administration. The greatest evil is not now done in the sordid dens of crime that Dickens loved to paint, where all the gangs, you understand the guys at the top that run countries and so are gangs of people, folks. So he's comparing it to the old idea of the beer-swilling guys and low-lit places, dens of crime that Dickens loved to paint. He said it's not done even in concentration camps and labour camps. In those we see its final result, but it is conceived and ordered, which means moved, seconded, carried, admitted, in clean, carpeted, warm, and well-lighted offices by quiet men with white collars and cut fingernails and smooth-shaven cheeks who do not need to raise their voices. Hence, naturally enough, my symbol for hell is something like the bureaucracy of a police state or the office of a thoroughly nasty business concern. And ain't that the way of it, folks? Because that's what we live under today. But most folk are completely unable, completely unable. I mean unable, not just unwilling, but unable to see it because of the conditioning. It's been so incredibly intense. Now, signs of third world countries is when you get things that are stolen that can be sold and for cash, things that are in demand and so on. I've mentioned articles before on copper theft in the US and elsewhere too, by the way. They used to do the same in South Africa and different places. But it says that copper is such a hot commodity that thieves are going after metal everywhere or anywhere they can find it. An electrical power station in Wichita, Kansas, or half a dozen middle-class homes in Morris Township, New Jersey. Even on a Utah highway construction site, crooks managed to abscond with 6 miles of copper wire. So those are just a handful of recent targets across the U.S. in the $1 billion business of copper thefts. I understand there's going to be more and more thieving going on elsewhere as we go down into austerity, as they want to call it, austerity. Which is planned, of course, with austerity. There's no question the theft has gotten much, much worse, said Mike Adelisi, president of the American Supply Association. And he says there was a perception that copper theft slowed down after the recession. I wonder when the recession ended, after the recession. And the rise in commodity prices seemed to ease off, he said. But that's not the case. The theft has only been growing. Stolen copper is valuable as scrap because the metal is used for so many items, from fiber optics to plumbing to anything electrical, and the profits are tempting. He says copper prices have leveled since the recession, but they're still high enough to have people steal it. And it's also a very tangible asset and hard to trace. Reselling it can bring in lots of money, he added. Remember too that China will import it if it's already pure copper, because they're making pretty well all the plumbing stuff that's shipped back to elsewhere, and the wiring too. It says 10 years ago, copper futures traded at 80 cents a pound on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. That's what it was, 80 cents. By 2006, it was up to $4 a pound, so they really jacked that up big time. They're now trading at about $3 a pound, lower than 7 years ago, but still 375% higher than 2003. And it says, according to the latest stats from the National Insurance Crime Bureau, which tracks instances of metal theft, 25,083 crimes or claims were filed from 2009 to 12, compared with 13,861 from 2006 to 8. Nearly 96% of the claims in the more recent period were for copper theft. By the way, they're stealing bronze and everything in copper from graveyards too, that are often attached to the stones. The 5 leading states for the thefts are Ohio, Texas, Georgia, California, and Illinois, the NICB said. The problem has been left largely to local law enforcement agencies, though the FBI stepped in and arrested dozens of people over the last 5 years. But as I say, it's so lucrative a field when your country's plummeting, and there's less and less work going around, and prices are skyrocketing because of managed inflation and mandated inflation, by the way, year by year. But it just shows you how they're taking massive amounts, some of them, and they're getting really good gangs because they're taking massive amounts at one go. It says in March someone took off with $68,000 worth of copper from a PCE&G substation under construction in Montgomery Township, New Jersey, making off with several 1,000-pound spools of wire. And it goes on and on and on. So that's one symptom of everything going down the tubes as it's meant to go. How else are you going to bring it into austerity, folks? What do you think that means? What do you think? Everybody's read these articles on the mainstream, but it really doesn't sink in, because people have been trained since birth that there's people above them that deal with all of this that come from special rooms and are somehow daddy figures or something. They would never do that to you. Even when they're talking about it, they'll never go and, of course they're doing it to you. They go to all these world meetings and they plan to bring you into austerity. And how do you get you into? They've got to bring in inflation, low wages, etc., 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 to get you into austerity, high taxations. And of course to make sure that all the utilities and those supply food, utilities and so on, skyrocket in price. It's very simple. All your extra spending money is now to go to essentials only. I keep saying this. Another part too is also to do with the lifestyle. Now, I've mentioned so many times that the culture industry is a main part of planning the future by those who create the future and plan it all. The culture industry has to go down the tubes, or at least sort of take the old society down the tubes with it. That's why all non-governmental organizations get money from the private foundations owned by the big bankers, and they get money from your governments. They get tax money only for pushing for radical change. And we'll go into radical change when we come back after this break.
listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network. Because you can handle the truth.
Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix. Talking about culture industry, of course, and how it's an essential part in guiding the future, because if you want to get from A to B, the big boys and their think tanks look at all the things that would stop them from getting to A to B to C and so on. And if you took the society, say, for the 1950s and put it in the present day and then hit them with everything that they're getting hit with now from the culture industry, it was meant to change their behavior, there'd be mass riots. And the part of the reason was to see the culture industry, according to the Frankfurt School, who was heavily involved in setting a lot of it up with its future agenda, was set up really, again, using your tax money and private foundations money to destroy all that was normal in those strong societies. So that government, in its true socialist form, as big government and lots of government agencies, would be the masters. In the 1950s, they could never have done it because people who all had so much in common with each other, and most of them were married, for instance, and had children, would stand up together. And you had so much common with all your neighbours, they'd all stand up with you too. That's how it is. So what you do is you break up all the bonds of that, you destroy the marriage. That was in the Communist Manifesto too. And so on and so on. And that also came out during the Rees Commission back in the 1950s to do with the private foundations encouraging this kind of thing. And no one asks, how come your governments are financing all groups that say they're for radical change? What they mean is destroying all that was. All that was, folks. They made you strong and healthy and kept you together for the world that was to be planned for them. And here we are with it. And you find in reality shows and so on, just like Adorno and others said, they would train the public through all the different things they would see and then push it in the entertainment industry and culture industry through shows, movies and dramas and so on. But this is the secret life of swingers. Now, I know they've gone down the tubes in television drastically, so I never watch TV. And if you want a good mind that still works, don't watch it at all, folks, because it's weaponized. But anyways, the life of swingers is this new reality show reveals what really goes on when 5 average couples swap sexual partners. This is mainstream media here, you know. And it says they'll follow the 5 average all-American couples. So this is the idea to make you think, just like the Kinsey report was to make all women think that we're missing out on something, then all women behaved the way that his subjects did. He just didn't tell you he was using prostitutes in all his studies. He just forgot to mention that. But that was to get everyone so-called liberated, so they try all this stuff themselves. And you can see how psychiatry benefited a great boon in it, because everybody ended up kind of mentally ill in their 40s and 50s, done it all, seen it all, but literally had nobody at all to share their lives with, including children. But anyway, this is another one of the same thing going on. And it says that they juggle marriages, careers and daily life with swinging. And of course they'll get a lot of viewers, because as soon as you mention sex lives, people are just, addicted to this kind of stuff about other people. And that's why you watch movies about people. You know, it's hard to watch movies about, say, insects or something. But, it's easy to watch movies about people because you see, you are part of a species. And in tribal instincts that you have as a species, you've got to know everything that happens, say, in a local village. You got to know who's who, and you got to know all the different quirks and quarks about different people in that village. It was very important in those days. But that instinct's still with us. Still with us. So when you hear about stuff like this, the average American couples, all American couples, having swing parties, orgies, and swapping partners and all the rest of it, this is to make your village instinct still kicks in, and people gravitate towards this and so on. And then they'll start to and they'll see people as very, very human. And that's what they do too when they make these particular documentaries or whatever. They'll cut out certain things they'll say that are negative, and they'll keep in all the positive little things they say about it. And other folk will say, well, maybe I should try that too. And that's how simple it is to get it all started, you see. But I'll put this link up tonight to show you how it all works together. As I say, the Frankfurt School came out with it at first, And they would use music too, as well as dramas, etc., to change the culture into a radical change, meaning completely destroy the old culture, which is pretty well done. It's almost here for most folk. And also too, in Britain, which is just swamped with immigration, of course, every year they come up with the same kind of stuff. It says a baby boom Britain, the highest number of births since 1971, fueled by migrants and older mothers. It's mainly migrants. It says nearly 724,000 babies were born in England and Wales last year. A quarter were babies born to immigrant mothers, new figures reveal. But another ones were born to first generation. They're already citizens, but they're still immigrants in a sense. So you could go way up beyond a quarter. So almost 30,000 were women over the age of 40, which is still pretty small. The highest number of births since the tail end of the 1960s, so-called baby boom. And the key reason for the rise in numbers of babies is large-scale immigration of the past decade. What do you mean decade? They've been doing it for 20-odd years or more. Which has brought in mainly young men and women ready to have families, which is true enough. The countries they're bringing them from didn't have the entertainment industry and the cultural wars upon the public. And they still have families, strangely enough. Isn't it strange? And it says newly arrived migrants also tend to have higher birth rates than people in the existing population, which is true enough. Because again, Britain had, since World War I actually, they had an ongoing drumbeat from the top down, telling them to have fewer children. Lots of books were put out between the two world wars about this, in fact. And many of them criticised the ones who were telling the public to have less children, because the ones who were telling them to do it were the big aristocratic families that often had 10 children in their families. But the ones down below shouldn't have that, you see. Because, by the way, they had this whole agenda planned back then, even in World War I, to bring in multiculturalism across these systems, destroy the old system, and eradicate it altogether. Folk have no idea what really goes on, you know. Anyway, it says another factor pushing up the birth rates is the growing trend for women of 40 and older to have children. Numbers of babies born to 40-something are now running at 5 times the level of the mid-1970s and reached almost 30,000 last year. And, you know, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, there's also one for Scotland, which says the same thing. Scotland's going up, but again, it's mainly due to immigration again. Same thing's happening in Ireland, by the way. So, as well on the way to the agenda being fulfilled there. Also want to mention tonight that an email service that was used by Snowden shuts down amid fight over customer information. It says an encrypted email service believed to have been used by the American fugitive Edward Snowden has shut down abruptly amid a legal fight that appeared to involve US government attempts to win access to customer information. The CEO said, I've been forced to make a difficult decision to become complicit in crimes against the American people or walk away from nearly 10 years of hard work by shutting down Lavabit. Lavabit owner Ladar Levison wrote in a letter posted on the Texas-based company's website. Mr. Levison said he had decided to suspend operations but was barred from discussing the events over the past 6 weeks that led to his decision. That matches the period since Snowden went public as a source of media reports detailing secret electronic spying operations by the US National Security Agency. This experience has taught me one very important lesson, he said. Without congressional action or a strong judicial precedent, I would strongly recommend against anyone trusting their private data to a company with physical ties to the United States, Mr. Levison wrote. And that says it all, doesn't it? That says it all. And it says later, an executive with a better-known provider of secure email said his company had also shut down that service. John Callis, co-founder of Silent Circle, said Twitter, and in a blog post that Silent Circle had ended its silent mail. We see the writing on the wall. We've decided it's best for us to shut down silent mail now, Mr. Callis wrote on a blog addressed to customers. We've not received subpoenas, warrants, security letters, or anything else by the government, and this is why we are acting now, so that they won't get them and get charged with it. I mean, this is police state stuff, isn't it? That's where we are. It says large providers help authorities gather data on users. At a Moscow news conference 4 weeks ago, a Human Rights Watch reps said she'd been contacted by Snowden from a Lavabit email address, according to news website globalpost.com. Use of effective encryption by regular email users is rare. Some of Snowden's leaked documents show that Google, Microsoft and other large providers have been compelled to help intelligence authorities gather email and other data on their users. The big providers and other companies typically offer encryption, but said they cooperate with legal requests, including those by intelligence officials. Alphabet was something of an outlier, in part because it said its email was encrypted on its servers and could only be accessed with the user's password. So it's quite something when top guys of companies in the US that do with email tell you not to use any company that's based in the States. No physical ties to the US. It's amazing how all this is happening, but those involved in the US will never believe it. They still want to believe that something will go right now, and that the folks at the top really are trying to look after their own best interests. See, you make excuses for the abusers, don't you? Back with more after this. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix. What you see too is not just scams from the top and corruption at the top in government. You'll find when societies go down the tubes, it goes right down to the bottom level, all the corruption, local councils, everything, including all the industries. Medical industry is a big one for it, of course. Especially when they can deal with insurance companies, and doctors do it directly sometimes, and no one checks into what they're up to. Here's an article that stands out because you wouldn't believe it. I've always said the biggest money is made out of misery and off of misery, human misery. And that's where the biggest money truly is made. But it says at Rochester Mills, Michigan, it says Dr. Farid Fatah, website for his Michigan hematology oncology practice, promises the best cancer care anywhere, but U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuaid says otherwise. Federal agents arrested the 48-year-old Oakland Township doctor this morning at his Rochester Hills practice. McQuaid says he's charged with healthcare fraud for his role in a scheme to submit false claims to Medicare for treatments that were medically unnecessary. It probably killed a lot off, actually, quicker. McQuaid said the fraud scheme involves $35 million. And there's a lot of them at this. Wherever you give them a free hand, you see, they're special people, they're all professionals. As soon as you say that, folks sort of stand back and think they're all honest, too. They get very confused. I think they must be honest, you know. Federal officials are alleging an even worse crime than cheating Medicare in their criminal complaint against Fatah. The FBI agents say Dr. Fatah directed the administration of unnecessary chemotherapy to patients in remission. The feds say he also deliberately misdiagnosed patients having cancer to justify unnecessary cancer treatment. Federal agents say Fatah directed administration of chemotherapy to end-of-life patients who would not benefit from the treatment. They'd die faster, actually, at that stage, and deliberately misdiagnosed patients without cancer to justify the expensive testing. And they say Dr. Fatah owns and operates Michigan hematology oncology centers, which has offices in Clarkston, Bloomfield Hills, Lapeer, Sterling Heights, and Oak Park. The agents also searched his house at Oakland Township, as well as Fatah's other offices in Clarkston and Bloomfield Hills. They took evidence from Fatah's United Diagnostics, which is just down the street from his Rochester Hills oncology office. The Action News was there Tuesday morning as the FBI took boxes into the Rochester Hills location to start executing their search warrants. So, this happens all over the place. I can remember even in Canada, with the health system they have here and the National Health, and they don't check on the doctors to see how many patients they actually have seen per year. They just take their word for it. And we've had massive overbilling before with guys who are unscrupulous, and there's plenty of them out there. The temptation for it is just too big for so many of them. That seems to be human nature as we go down the tubes, you know, because there's no morality left in any way at all. It's getting worse, actually, as we see. Plus, this article is awfully good because as America goes down the tubes, as I started off this broadcast saying that you see the signs of a third world country in so many ways. But it says Americans are now renouncing the U.S. citizenship, and it surged sixfold in the second quarter from a year earlier as the government prepares to introduce tougher asset disclosure rules. Expatriates giving up their nationality at US embassies climbed to 1,131 in the 3 months through June from 189 in the three earlier period, according to Federal Register figures published today. That brought the first half total to 1,810 compared with 235 for the whole of 2008. The US, the only nation in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which again was set up by the Royal Institute for International Affairs, CFR, and it says that taxes citizens wherever they reside, is searching for tax cheats in offshore centres, including Switzerland, as the government tries to curb the budget deficit. In other words, this massive debt that they have. Shunned by Swiss and German banks and facing tougher asset disclosure rules under the Foreign Accounts Tax Compliance Act, more of the estimated 6 million Americans living overseas are weighing the cost of holding a US passport. So they get taxed when they stay abroad, you see. It says, with the looming deadline for FATCA, more and more US citizens are becoming aware that they have US tax reporting obligations, says Matthew Ledvina, US tax lawyer at Annaford AG in Zurich. Once aware, they decide to renounce their US citizenship. Why pay two taxes, one in one country and one in another, right? FATCA requires foreign financial institutions to report to the Internal Revenue Service information about financial accounts held by US taxpayers or held by foreign entities in which US taxpayers hold a substantial ownership interest. It was estimated to generate $8.7 billion over 10 years, according to Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation. The 2010 FATCA law requires banks to withhold 30% from certain US-connected payments to some accounts of American clients who don't disclose enough information to the IRS. While banks can sign agreements to report to the IRS individually, many are precluded from doing so by privacy laws in their jurisdictions. The Treasury Department last month announced that the IRS will delay the start of FATCA by 6 months until July 1st, 2014, to give foreign banks time to comply with the law. The extension of the Act follows a previous one-year delay announced in 2011. And they're saying abroad too, and other banks that are outside the US are saying that the concerns that the FATCA is simply too complex. The latest delay comes after the Swiss government agreed in February to simplifications that would help the country's banks implement FATCA. The US wishes to ensure that all income earned worldwide by US taxpayers on accounts held abroad can be taxed by the United States, the Swiss government said on April 10th. Since 2011, Americans who disclosed their non-US bank accounts to the IRS must file the more expensive 3938 form that asks for all foreign financial assets, including insurance contracts, loans, and shareholdings in non-UNNS companies. Failure to file that form can result in a fine as much as $50,000, and the clients can be penalized half the amount in an undeclared foreign bank account under the Bank Secrecy Act of 1970. So they're really going at it now as the US is going down the tubes with owing so much incredible debt. They say actually the debt, they've reevaluated the debt, and now they've said it's six times what they said it was before, with all their wars going on across the world and all their giveaways to other countries and so on and so on and so on. Obviously, the cat comes home to roost eventually. And there's simply not enough money getting made internally because there's less and less work internally since all manufacturing pretty well moved offshore quite a few years back to China, thanks to private organizations, like I said, the CFR, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, that created the World Trade Organization and signed the GATT Treaty to make sure this all happened. It's not a surprise. They knew what would happen when they did it, by the way. So now they're scrounging across the world to try to rake in as much cash as they can, but people are certainly they're just giving up their citizenships. They're moving offshore and giving up their citizenships because the writing's on the wall for it. Nothing's going to get better just like that. It doesn't happen like that. And apart from that, they've told us the plans is it's not going to get better. And all the top think tanks that worked for the big foundations. Also, too, this article is quite amusing in some ways, but it says Costa Rica will stop sending cocaine to Miami. According to an official press release from the Organization of Judicial Investigations, Costa Rica will no longer send cocaine or other controlled substances to the U.S., at least for the time being. The announcement comes in the wake of news reports about nearly 24 tons of cocaine transported by the U.S. Air Force to Miami Saturday, July 27, 2013. 24 tons. The OIJ further explained that the officials in Costa Rica had spoken to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration about the temporary lack of an incinerator to destroy seized powder cocaine, marijuana and other illegal drugs. Prior to the massive airlift of cocaine to Miami late July, the OIJ had managed to destroy almost 23 tons of drugs over the years at a cement factory in Cartago, but a couple of unfortunate instances resulted in the stockpiling of confiscated drugs, and the OIJ ended up with too much coke. There's so much they don't want to do with it nowadays. So they're flying it over to the US, to Miami and different places. A lot of it goes missing once it arrives, by the way. It says it's in Article 2, naturally. And it's just coming in like crazy into Costa Rica. And it says that before a Boeing C-17 Globemaster from the U.S. Air Force landed at the Daniel Oduber Quiros International Airport in late July to transport pallets upon pallets of cocaine to Miami, the OIJ evidence warehouse in San Joaquin de Flores, province of Heredia, was ready to bust from all the drugs contained therein, particularly cocaine, hydrochloric, in powder form. Their incinerator had bust down, and so they sent it to the US. It's not the first time they've sent it to the US. I say a lot of it's gone missing in the US too before, of course, naturally. Anyway, that's it from Hamish myself from Ontario, Canada. It's good night. May your God or your gods go with you.